Hello, this is Rowan from Scrutinize This. So today we're going to be scrutinizing Past Lives, a film by Celine Song. Are we going to be singing songs of praise, or are we going to be sobbing at the end like poor old Arthur? So we're watching this film in sort of the context of the Oscar Best Picture nominees, culminating in the final ceremony on the 10th of March. So on the panel in our podcast, we have cinema savant Dennis Hottie, we have our resident film novice Badi Hassani, and myself. So let's take a look.
All right, cool. So, Past Lives. Okay, Oscar nominee for Best Picture. So, the film, how I understood it to be, is a film about two childhood friends who get separated. They sort of are dating. How much dating can you do as 12-year-olds?
They're only 12, so they're sort of just frolicking around in a park.
Exactly.
If 12-year-olds, as 12-year-olds do.
Yeah. And it's about how life kind of separates them, but they're kind of always meant to be destined to be together. And it's about how they, at the end of it, don't end up being together. They keep in communication. She emigrates to New York at the age of 12. They communicate 12 years later, and then finally meet each other 12 years after that, so after 24 years. So it's about how life sort of takes you in a different direction, and you're not always going to be with the person you're destined to be with. That's how I understood the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a puzzle, the film. I mean,
it's pretty clear.
There's not multiple interpretations, really. It's not exactly. No. It's not a Nolan sort of extravaganza, right?
No, like I said, it's not a puzzle. It didn't get me thinking deeply about life that much. It was just a clear cut where, you didn't end up with that person. You decided to move away, and let's get on with it. So that's a brief summary of the film, of how I understood it. So yeah, it wasn't that difficult to follow or understand, really. But in terms of, because it's obviously a English and Korean film. Was it primarily a Korean film, I believe? And
yeah, I'm not actually sure. I'm assuming it's Canadian.
Korean. Yeah, she's Canadian. She's the director.
The actress.
Sorry.
Celine Song's Canadian. Greta Lee is American. So I'm guessing it's a cross-Pacific partnership.
Wikipedia has it as an American romantic drama film. So I don't know. Maybe in terms of the production, it could be an American. Obviously A24 and a few attached to it. So maybe it is an American. But her, the director's, I think a lot of her upbringing is in Canada. So obviously, and that factors in the movie somewhat, especially if we take it as a bit of a autobiographical film.
Yeah, it's kind of autobiographical film. I think it's kind of set of a similar situation that the director had as well, which is kind of what influenced her to make the film. But it is half of it, or maybe more, it's in Korean. So I don't think it's under the category of foreign film, is it? This film.
Yeah, I mean the Oscars is a bit strange because they have a foreign film category, right? But then a lot of Best Pictures in the last 5 years, you have Roma and Parasite, are obviously foreign language films who have won Best Picture. So I don't know. I'm not sure about that category. I don't know, Dennis. That
is the case. Obviously, we've had Parasite famously, which is a complete. I don't think there's any American financially. I don't think there's any American input in that film at all. But with this film, though, it is an American movie, and obviously we'll discuss how it plays out in terms of the languages spoken and obviously the intricacies of the story. But for all intents and purposes, officially, it's an American movie.
But obviously, Seoul is like a pretty big backdrop to the whole unfolding of the plot, right?
Yeah. But of course, that doesn't really, because when the Oscars look at it, or any kind of festival, whatever, they'll look at who's financed this movie and things like that when it comes to foreign language film. I don't think, as far as I know, I could be wrong, I don't think they judge it on a percentage of the language spoken, if that makes
Alright, so
sense.
It's an American film. I thought it was a Korean, and I was going to ask, like, how much recognition do foreign language films get at the Oscars? Do they get much recognition as such?
They're getting more and more recognition. I mean, to be honest, if you look at most Best Pictures, they've been English, or American. There's sort of, I won't say I'm an expert of the Oscars, but there's your films like in the 60s, Oliver Twist won Best Picture. That's an English film. I don't know if there's other. I mean, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon won a lot of Academy Awards, and that's a Chinese film, 2000 in the year 2000 by Ang Lee.
Yeah.
And I think that, along with Roma, are the two foreign language films which have won the most amount of Oscar nods.
Yeah.
So they're getting more and more sort of more and more awards as time goes on. Yeah.
It's still very few, though. I mean, obviously, Rowan mentioned Parasite and Roma. And Parasite and Roma, they weren't the same year, were they? They were, I think, Roma was 17 or 18.
Yeah, 2017, and Parasite 2020.
But in terms of them being nominated for Best Picture, I mean, I can't think of any movie. I mean, maybe I could Google it, but I can't think of any movie prior to like the 90s. I know Life is Beautiful. I think that was nominated for Best Picture, if I'm not mistaken.
It was A Beautiful Life. Which one was it? The
No,
Italian
Life is Beautiful. Roberto Benigni, the sort of Holocaust.
He won the best foreign language. He didn't.
Okay.
Win. Yeah. He didn't.
But
win
was he
Best
nominated?
Picture.
Was he nominated for? We could have done.
I mean, but that was in the 90s, if I'm correct, right?
It should have been
Roberto Benigni.
Oscars 98. So wait, what does the criteria need to be for it to be a foreign film? So obviously it had the language spoken into it, and also its finance. And I'm guessing those are the two main ones.
Yeah, right? Because as far as I know, the country's sort of that specific country's sort of recognized film board. Let's in this instance, this is South Korea. They will themselves nominate one of their own movies. So let's say Parasite, obviously 2019.
What do you think about a film like Apocalypto, right? Which is obviously Mel Gibson and American studios making it.
Yeah.
Would a film like that, even though it's in like the ancient Mayan dialect, that would still qualify?
That's a spot, but I think you make a spot on comparison there, because that's exactly my point. That is still, for all intents and purposes, an American film. And obviously we have older texts in terms of gaze, and for people, when I say gaze, Gaze, the perspective, the view.
Not talking about you, buddy.
Wow, that's a bit offensive.
But that gaze on things like, obviously, things like let's say a gaze on homosexuality, for example. Just to we made the joke there, but other cultures, other countries, and things like that. Something like Apocalypto. Yeah, that's an American production from the ground up. Obviously, the topics and everything. I think there's not even a word of English spoken in that movie, but I think that makes it no less American.
So you don't think there should be a category saying for best foreign language film, considering so many best pictures are won by foreign films?
Well, not so many though. I mean,
that's true. That's true. But I mean, you mentioned like the Oscars is kind of trying to not just be American; it's trying to act as the world's sort of award ceremony. Does a foreign language film almost feels like it's kind of like pushing it into a little category and saying, okay, that's your award, you can walk off the stage. But surely, if they want to invite the whole world to join in this ceremony, then it shouldn't really exist, because it's kind of restricting them from getting other awards, no?
Restricting who?
I mean, it might not be restricting, but it kind of makes the category itself, best foreign language film, a little bit irrelevant.
Well, no, because the best foreign language, yes and no, because the best foreign language is obviously only sticking to contributions from other countries. They all submit. So let's say 100+ countries will submit one of their own films to the Academy Awards, and they say Portugal submits one of theirs, Italy one of theirs, Venezuela one of theirs. All of these now have the opportunity to be in that kind of a melting pot of movies there, and then obviously the Academy Awards picks, I don't know how many nominations they do for best, is it 5 or 10? But obviously those are standing up against other foreign movies, but foreign to the Academy Awards. But if one of them obviously rises above, and with Parasite, obviously we saw that clearly, because Parasite, after it breaks through the festivals, it clearly gets attention from the rest of the world, and I think
I see.
Yeah.
So if they get attention from just that category, can potentially mean they can get a nod in other categories.
Yeah, because I guess the best picture isn't the best American picture, right? Because obviously with Parasite, we also saw that they were nominated for obviously best director, best actor, a few other nominations like that. So I guess that one stands sort of globally. It's like, this is just the best from everything we've seen. But having said that, there is a question of, is it always the equal opportunity? Is it more likely for an American movie to take that spot, which I think clearly is the case, because if you've got one America versus the whole world, I mean, there's
what if we
bound to be...
flip it? How are American movies like seen in other festivals like Cannes or Berlin or any of these? Because obviously
Cannes
to them,
has a tendency to distance itself from Hollywood, right? So I
Oh,
don't
does
know.
it?
I mean, it'll be interesting to look down the Palme d'Ors and see.
Well, no, Palme d'Ors,
what
I mean...
I might be wrong, but it tends to, like, I mean, something like Michael Moore won with Bowling for Columbine, or maybe was it Fahrenheit 9/11?
No, Fahrenheit. He won for Fahrenheit
Things like that.
9/11,
Like
yeah.
they'll
didn't
they
Pulp
won't go
Fiction
for
win
the...
it as well?
Pulp Fiction
Actually, it
also
might, yeah,
won.
that's good. That's good. That's a good point.
The Tree of Life did for.
But I was saying
2011.
specifically Hollywood. I wasn't saying America, right? So
Yeah.
it's distancing itself from the Oscars. It can still pick, because obviously America is a huge, just the majority producer of films in general. Obviously not including Bollywood, but of the films most people watch, it's a big producer.
But-
so yeah, they'll still pick American movies, but not the Oscar baity ones, right?
Yeah, and also the Cannes Film Festival, they actually, if you look through I think any year they always show an appreciation for American cinema, because a lot of films that we wouldn't necessarily think as Cannes, a lot of people tend to expect Cannes films to be very artistic, whatever, but films like Top Gun premiered at Cannes, and obviously that kind of star power, Cannes still enjoys that. But when it comes to the Palme
That was the
d'Or-
year you went, right, Dennis?
Yeah, it was, and that I think for people, I mean, listen. Like, if
So
people
what was
wanna-
Tom Cruise like? Now tell the audience.
If
Come
people
on.
want to message in, like, what was it like meeting Tom Cruise? Throw your emails in. I'll try my best if I've...
Throw them.
One of them's going to hit me on the head.
You better close that window.
But they have an appreciation. But when it comes to the actual... the winners of something like the Palme d'Or, or obviously they have ones for screenwriting and things like that, the feeling is that it tends to be fair. Obviously, it's hard to look into these things statistically, because I mean, look, thousands and thousands of films are submitted every year. But yes, it feels a bit like they don't really care. The Cannes Film Festival doesn't really care. And
So you're saying
maybe
that
someone
they're
knows
less
better than I
biased
do.
compared to, let's say, Oscars towards their foreign films?
Well, look, we said in the first episode that the nature of the Oscars, it will be more biased, because a film that has more money to spend on things like marketing and more money to, get more producers on board. If you've got a great spec and you send it to, let's say, Disney, Disney can get, 50, 60 producers on, and that makes it a lot easier for you to get an Oscar nomination. Than it is if you're a Hungarian film produced by a local businessman. You may win at Venice or whatever, but it's hard unless you get a lot of global traction and you get a lot of attention from Western audiences. It's hard to sort of poke your head through the Oscars door, harder than obviously a big budget American film. Obviously Barbie, we mentioned that as an example of Barbie. Realistically, would it get that much of a look in at another festival? Probably not. Whereas obviously here, the story's a bit different. But obviously here, this episode's about past lives, but I think the general scope of it is that, foreign films, they don't impact the Oscars as much. And even if you watch it, I've watched a few of the shows live in full in the past few years, and you can see that the foreign stuff tends to just be like 20 seconds, just like crammed in, quickly.
They've ticked the box. They've mentioned it.
Yeah. There's not like it's not a big emphasis, because obviously the Oscars is very. We did the old A Star Is Born, but it's very show and dance, and there's a lot of performances and stuff like that. But you can feel that when it's time to actually talk about the films, it's like Sandra Bullock gets up and announces the best foreign film, and it's like 30 seconds of a director. He'll say something in his language, and they'll be like, hey, "Fuck off now," next nomination. So I don't know. That may change, but let's see. Let's see. I guess March 10th we'll find out.
This is about past lives.
We're open-minded. Hey, if the Oscars want to get back with us, we'll take them back. Okay.
I mean, there's certain criteria they need to meet after what they did last time to us, but
yeah.
The door's open.
They slapped Chris Rock in the face, innit? Or was that year before?
No, that was the last one. Yeah.
I still think about
Year
that.
before, I think. Who are they going to slap this year?
It's
Or who's going to slap who? Who's going to spit in whose face?
Is Joe Rogan nominated for anything? he's going to get up and punch someone in the face.
Yeah.
But I think that, to answer your question, I think it's still a bit hit and miss.
Right. So Past
Past
Lives. So this is Celine Song's debut for directing.
36, I think.
Sorry?
She's 36, still quite young.
Relatively young, and also she's got a bit of a career in theatre. From what I gathered, I did a quick little read up. So she seems quite accomplished as a writer, from what I saw.
Well, how do you guys think she did for her first movie as a director? Rowan, start us off. How do you think she did?
I think she the film itself is it's kind of moody in a way. It's kind of builds a nice mood. It builds the setting, and I kind of feel at ease when I'm watching it. Unlike a lot of the films we've been talking about, I don't feel like I'm being force fed just like garbage. I don't feel like I've just been, I don't feel like some sort of like fragua like duck being force fed a pipe full of bullshit, like sort of Barbie or maybe Oppenheimer. Obviously, it's Hollywood meets more independent cinema. You could put it on in the background, or you could fall asleep for like 20 minutes and come back to it and not really missed much, which you couldn't say with the other two films we've done, right?
I agree.
But I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It could be something. It could be something you could watch on a Sunday on mute and not really it just has a nice energy to it. One thing which I like about films, and which I may have mentioned before, but which Oppenheimer didn't do, which this film really does, it just builds the setting. It's like slow takes, nice peaceful pans through New York, like the Hudson River, in sort of nice 35mm film. It's just nice to watch. I'm not being bombarded with contrivances or things happening.
But wouldn't you say that it's a bit too easy to watch? Wouldn't you say it's a bit too
I mean,
simple?
it depends what you're going for, right? Like it kind of does have a Sofia Coppola feel, like Lost in Translation in a way. It's quite serene and calm. Obviously, you have the romantic sort of parallels as well. Obviously, I'm not really talking about the narrative, because the narrative I've seen before, and I think we can all agree that love triangle thing is being used to ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
And ironically, like people say it's kind of doing it differently, especially with the Arthur, the third wheel. People say he's been treated as more of a rounded individual, because we're kind of conditioned to always hate the third wheel of a love triangle, right? But to be honest, I think he's pretty.
He's alright.
There's not a lot of depth to his character.
But I
felt bad for him. I felt bad for him.
Yeah, like he's actually
for sure. I mean,
he's a nice guy.
He's one major cuck in that film. I'll say it straight up. I mean, I feel fucking bad. But
we need to have a little counter. It's the first time the word cuck has been used in this.
I'm surprised.
Podcast.
I suppose it's been 20 minutes and we haven't said it yet. But I mean, it's blatantly cuckoldry, right? I mean, especially the last scene. I mean, I know we'll be talking about the last scene quite a lot. Right. Even in terms of just the framing, the way it just frames out him so bombastically, just he's not even there. Pretty much. And then you see him, he is there. He's not gone away. He's not come back.
Let me intervene to go back quickly to Bardi's question, because obviously he's asking about Celine Song. So she's the director. It's her debut.
Just to tie that back, because obviously we detoured a bit, but considering it's her debut, she does a good job. It's nothing. The film isn't ambitious, but I think she does a good job in setting atmosphere. She could do a better job with the screenwriting or with her screenwriters, but in terms of her developing a style, and also giving the settings kind of justice, I think she does a good job. So it's a good start to her career, really.
But I think the thing that you mentioned, 35mm, it's actually one of the first things that I think I privately messaged you in the group. I can't remember. I mentioned the 35mm, and I went up and looked at that cinematographer, because I got the feel early on in this movie that the cinematographer was doing a really good job, because a lot of the just some nuances, like there's a scene in the hotel room at night. That's a great scene. It's all it's all nighttime. It's dark in the hotel room. We see the outline. It's slightly out of focus. He turns the light on. Something like that from a technical point of view.
Well, when Hae Sung, the Korean guy,
and he comes back. He turns the light on.
There's good mood.
Yeah, great. From a technical point of view, good. The mood is good. From a directing point of view, she's got the chops for sure. I mean, she's going to have a career as a director.
There's something magical about seeing the New York skyline in 35mm.
Right,
It
yeah,
kind of brings me back to like
Right.
Annie Hall or
very,
some like Woody Allen films,
very
you know?
old kind of Woody Allen
Especially
vibe.
that scene from Brooklyn, when near the Brooklyn Bridge, was sort of night. And it's looking
the
into
Hudson
Manhattan.
River, yeah, it's
Amazing.
It's lovely. It's
And
lovely.
you
But
can-
hold on,
and-
how do you guys know when something is 35mm? Because I've watched plenty of films,
Okay.
and I couldn't tell you,
I think
for the love of the
s-
money.
s- someone
Don't
like
tell
me
him,
will-
Rowan.
someone like me
Don't
will
tell him, Rowan.
pretend,
Don't
but-
tell him, Rowan.
No, I
Don't
want to
let
know.
Don't let him
no,
into the
you
magician
can,
circle.
No, I'm not going to tell you the way we find out. So yeah. No, sorry, but you can tell by the graininess. But I'm joking. Films
Yeah.
shot on digitally are just fake graininess. Like something like The Joker is obviously it's shot on a digital camera, but they do a lot of things to make it look like film. But you can look up the tech specs.
Well, I was
and
going to
that's
say,
how
yeah,
that's what they
ultimately,
do.
yeah, I think, especially in this day and age, you ultimately have to look it up. I mean, unless it's been shown in IMAX where you think, okay, this must be, 70mm, whatever. But most times I will go and look it up. But it tends to be the case that I'll get a feeling from it. I'll see a few scenes, and like Ron says, there's a certain grain, there's a noise, there's a character, especially in the darker scenes, because people who've used digital, they'll know that darker, so even with your phone, right, you can test it out now with your iPhone or whatever. If you try to shoot something at night, you get this almost crushing noise, almost to the point of distortion. But 35mm, when you've got some
definitely.
cine lenses and stuff, the effect is almost the opposite. There's a softness and elegance to it, and obviously a good.
Oh, so you guys look it up as well then? It's not like you can just tell instantly. You guys may get an idea and
just
then
to
you look it up.
confirm, because we obviously know
confirm.
beforehand. But
Yeah,
we just
yeah.
want that to
If you're,
absolutely crystallize.
yeah, exactly. But if you're watching like Collateral, it's pretty clear that this is a digitally shot film, right? And you can sense it. So it depends on, but yeah, I'll always have a look on IMDb at the tech specs or whatever. They tend to be clear. But the point I was going to make is that Celine Song, she's obviously, and you mentioned the story and plot we'll get into in her script, but she's in control of the mood that she wants to bring out. She's pacing herself. She's not rushing, and for a debut director, that's impressive.
The pacing's a good point. The film is really well paced for me. I like slowness.
Yeah, I was going to say, because she doesn't rush, that takes a great deal of confidence, because you have to think from a director's point of view, there's multiple pressures, right? Forgetting even the pressure of the studio when you deliver that film, but you're on set, you've got actors asking for input, you've got this asking for input. And if you're someone who's making a film of that nature, I mean, you're almost making it like a student film, but you're actually backed by millions. You need to be in control of every element. She clearly shows that she's got that touch almost, if that makes sense. So from a directing point of view, it was, I mean, I'll say this is the biggest positive that I'll give to the film. Cinematography and the directing, these things, I thought they were worthy of recognition. Obviously we talk about if it's best picture or worthy. Also, how loud is that? There's a plane behind. I think it's
I can't hear it.
Oh, really? Okay. But it's Oscar worthy. We'll discuss later on. But recognition wise, yeah, huge respect for her role, and obviously technically, I like the film a lot, and the look of it I liked a lot.
All right.
Yeah, it does seem a bit out of place being in the Best Picture nominations. Like,
Well,
I don't get it.
seems
I
a
don't
bit
get it.
strange. But it's
Yeah.
not to discount her, and it's her first film. I mean,
well, one thing that I'll draw similarities to in terms of look, and it's interesting because this also comes from a theatre, and I think there's something that when something's adapted from a theatrical background, it tends to go down this route, which is Moonlight, which is a good example. I think Moonlight is one of my personal favourite films, but it does something similar.
because that was adapted from a play, right?
Yeah, well, Moonlight specifically was a play, and obviously Celine Song's background is in theatre, but one thing they both have in common is, which theatre doesn't have, and I think maybe this is why they draw from it in cinema a lot, is that they pace themselves in a way that's so deliberate, but there's sort of, it builds as this kind of burgeoning tension, but it's so delicate over the top, and it's enjoyable to watch because, like you said, you can sort of sit back and just soak it in, but at the same time there's themes and topics that keep you interested in watching it. Obviously Moonlight, I think, is a perfect example of that, but I think this movie had it. Where this movie loses me is obviously in the story, but I'll let you sort of keep going at the questions and maybe we'll touch on that specifically.
All right. Okay. So, director Celine Song did not let Teo Yoo or John Magaro meet before shooting their first scenes together. Okay, so when Arthur and was it Hae Sung meet for the first time, it's also the actors that meet each other for the first time as well.
Okay.
So when you
Interesting.
think of that, that's an interesting technique to use, in film, where you actually keep two actors separated so that when they do go
almost
on
like an
stage-
Alien, where Ridley Scott doesn't tell the cast about the
What
alien.
day to start work?
Yeah.
He doesn't tell them what day to start. They're like, "Are we starting today?" Or he's like, "No, just stay ready."
He's 2 months late. Yeah. But I think Heath Ledger also did that as well for his role in The Dark Knight, where he also came onto the scene. So I know a few instances when that did happen and it does work, but from reading it goes eventually that shot didn't it make it into the final film. No, it didn't.
Okay.
So all
Right.
those scenes that they shot, so it kind of goes back on itself. So they went through all of that trouble to keep them apart, and then at the end of it, they didn't use it.
Is it because they just had an instant dislike to each other? Like, who the fuck is this guy?
I don't know
Who have I
why.
been cast with? What
Who
a
has
fucking
it-
loser.
This dickhead's on. Nah, get me out of
Imagine,
here.
I can imagine a moment where he goes out shopping and one of the producers is with him, and he's like, "Oh, is that the Korean?" He's like, "No, just walk along. Don't talk to him. I've no idea who that is. That's just a Korean guy. Don't ignore him. Just move along."
Imagine someone going to that length.
So
to
wait, are you
keep actors away?
So are you saying that in? Wait, let me get this right, because obviously in the
Yeah.
movie there's a scene where she brings, so Nora brings him home, and obviously the Arthur's at home. He's just sort of there chilling,
Yeah, he's
waiting,
like
and then
playing
they introduce
video
each
games
other.
or some shit. Yeah.
Are you saying that there was a take of that was missing, or are you saying there was an entirely separate scene where they first meet that wasn't in? That's what I'm a bit confused by that.
Yeah. So there was another scene. So when they actually meet for the first time,
Okay.
but that didn't end up being the final take in the film.
So
they had to
something
do
that's
multiple-
not even we don't
I
even know
see.
about. It's
Right,
completely
right.
cut from the.
It's completely cut. So I'm
Okay.
saying, imagine going through all that length to build up this anticipation. These two actors, they don't meet, even outside of filming, and they finally get into on stage, let's say, or ready for the shoot, and
On
that
the
ends
set.
up being cut. Set. So
Shakespeare
on the
over
scene.
here, like looking
Yeah.
on the stage, right?
Stage left.
This is Macbeth. Yeah, he enters stage right.
So
Yeah.
obviously we know that it can be effective sometimes, but I mean, how bad would that have to been for it to be cut? Because it would have been effective, if the actors don't meet and the first time they see each other, he opens the door and he's there with his backpack.
No, but it would
and his
obviously
suitcase.
depend if the sort of dynamic worked in that one take. I guess it was just a risk that Celine Song was taking, right?
So do many
Plenty
directors take risks?
Plenty of the movie gets cut, right? We don't. The amount
Yeah.
of footage we don't see is obviously
Of
huge.
course,
so-
listen, there's probably 45 takes of him up on that little train thing when he's video recording, was it Skyping her? There's
Oh,
probably
yeah.
45 takes of that. But I'm saying,
We should talk about the Skype conversations because those are.
Yeah, those are interesting. But to quickly answer your question, I mean, you mentioned the I'd heard about the Nolan doing that with Heath Ledger, and that it makes sense. The Heath Ledger one somewhat makes sense because I mean the anticipation behind this new Joker, right? I mean, it was palpable even from an audience point of view, and I'm sure on the set, people are eager to see, okay, who's the Joker going to be? He's almost become the star of this movie, right? He ends up ultimately being the star. That one makes a bit more sense because there's obviously elements of makeup and performance that, I mean, you're working from nothing, really. You know it's not going to be Jack Nicholson, so what is it going to be? But for them to not meet, I kind of understand the logic behind it.
I understand it completely because
Yeah.
obviously there's a lot of build up of both of them, both the characters are hearing a lot through her about the other one,
Yeah.
and we're kind of trying to understand what each one thinks of each other. So it makes sense for them for that.
I mean, it worked when you
for
were
her to
thinking
do
back
that.
now on her, because one thing that I liked performance wise in the movie is so Greta Lee plays Nora Moon in it, and she's obviously the sort of, I mean, the central premise is that she's almost trapped between these two states of mind, right? She's got South Korea on the mind and New York writing on the mind, and I understand that, and from an immigrant, I don't know if people know, but I immigrated here from a lovely little village somewhere else, so I understand that point of view, and there's some interesting character and performance features she adds. Like she'll do this thing where she'll put on slightly different tones of voice and behavioral gestures towards Arthur, and then different when she's talking in South Korean. It's almost like she's playing a slightly different person, and obviously that tension helps to build when Arthur does inevitably meet this man. So it does make sense actually. Thinking of it, I think that works. Obviously, I don't know logistically how much of a headache it was, but it does work because that is probably the only tension in the movie, right? There's no other real tension. We don't there's not a fight that builds up. There's nothing. That the only tension is when these two meet. What is Nora gonna do, right? How is she gonna sort of?
But if it works, surely it should work for that first take, because it's their initial
the problem
reaction.
there is that
Still-
we don't
still a
know.
risk.
We don't know also if that was a. I mean, that could have been a scripting change. That could have been a specific set issue. There's a few things. I mean, I don't know how much information we have on it, but I still think that if they haven't met up to a certain point, okay, let's say they've initially broken the ice on a few takes that weren't used on a scene that we don't see. I still think that there's a great tension between them when they first meet. I think that scene when he does come into the house is probably one of the highlights in terms of scenes in that movie, because I mean, one thing that's difficult to do, we mentioned Nolan the episode before in terms of he builds these great big set pieces, you know, they're like it's like huge moments, big sort of swells of music and stuff. But in this movie, all we've got to go on really are these almost micro transactions in terms of scenes, right? So when he comes into that house, and obviously Arthur's there waiting. There's even a great shot where Arthur's just stood there, which I sort of resonate. I mean, I felt, you know, the pain of Arthur a lot throughout that film. But there's a great scene where he's just sort of sat there, and it's so you in that moment, I'm like, I can so understand his thing, because he's about to meet someone who he's probably thinking, why the fuck am I meeting this guy anyway, right? What's my role here? What am I orchestrating? Some sort of abstract threesome or whatever. So the tension there is quite good. So I think however she played it, whether it's through this and her other techniques, she's clearly gotten it right, I think, because that probably is the highlight story-wise, plot-wise of the movie and of their interaction. So I mean, obviously we don't see the first scene, but clearly they've managed to sustain that tension between the three of them, I would say, but especially between
there's an
Arthur.
incredible amount of awkwardness, right, between Teo Yoo, Hae-sun, and Arthur. It's palpable. Not just because of the obviously the language kind of is a bit of a comedic thing, right? The language difference.
Yeah.
But you can feel the sort of like both of them thinking, what the fuck's going on, you know?
But also the bar scene where, I mean, they start talking, they translate a bit to Arthur, then they talk a bit, and then they just completely forget about him, and they just go off.
I mean, I forgot about him. Don't know about you. I forgot he was even in the film.
Well, the bar scene, what I liked, because obviously we open with that bar scene, and with a film like this, I think the opening is kind of going to do so much of the heavy lifting here.
Yeah, it's done from like a third party.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty clever, because the opening and I was disappointed a bit following the rest of the movie, because the opening throws up some good questions to me, which is that obviously there's a point in the opening we don't see who's talking. It's almost like a POV shot, and a great one actually, because it slowly comes in. I actually like that shot, but the people talking, we don't know where they're from or anything like that, but they start making assumptions about Nora and the two men, and they start saying, oh, she's dating the Korean guy, or she's
with brother and sister, or
something.
something.
Or the brother and sister. And I think that throws up interesting questions, which I thought that the movie would subsequently lean into a little bit more than it does. I thought that movie would, because I'd seen the trailer, and obviously the trailer, I mean, these days trailers are like, you know, I think sometimes longer than the movie, you know, you start finding out everything. But I thought that it's going to lean into more the kind of other people's perceptions and things like that. Obviously, it's a lot more intricate than that, which there's nothing wrong with that. But that scene adds, it almost asks you a few questions I felt weren't necessarily answered. Not in terms of who they are, because obviously we find that out pretty simply, but in terms of the more general perception of things like that, which we don't ever really touch on. Because if you think later, we obviously almost end, sort of, it's towards the end, we go back to that scene, and obviously there's the awkwardness and everything like that, but the movie kind of asks us to think, okay, so who are they, right? But I don't know, at that point it's so slippery where I'd sort of almost forgotten the premise. Like, even though that's the bridge towards all of this, it gets a bit too slippery. But I don't know if we're getting into the full...
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that's really resolved, right, in the whole film. It kind of feels like we're just back at the beginning a little bit, and there's obviously still going to be trouble between
Why do you think that
Arthur.
is, though?
Do you think do you think it's all resolved between Arthur and Nora?
No, I agree.
Just about to start their
troubles,
right?
I agree with you, yeah. But I was just curious, why do you think that? Because I've got a sort of a reason of why I think that. And I went in and I read a bunch of reviews about the film to see if anyone kind of echoed my sentiment. And a lot of the reviews were so blanket positive, which I didn't really agree with. So I was curious if anyone, before I say it, did anyone kind of share my feeling on it? That's why I was curious. Why do you think it remains unresolved by the end?
Why do I think it remains unresolved? I mean, look, I still think Arthur's obviously going to be pretty. I mean, he's obviously, even though they kind of hug at the end, he's not happy with the situation, and I wouldn't. Pretty much all of us wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So and obviously she's not going to go back to Korea. So there's a certain amount of just nothing has really been resolved. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's in a refreshingly. It's sort of being kind of frank in a way. Some things don't need to be resolved like that.
So with regard to the end scene that we're now talking, so Celine Song deliberately had the two main characters walk from right to left at the very end of the movie. For her, so it's like a representation of a timeline. So when she leaves, she goes on the screen on the left, where he gets into the Uber, which is going back into the past and leaving the past behind. And then when she goes back to the apartment, it's going to the right into the future, as if to say, that's the past, that's the old me. I'm leaving that behind. He effectively gone into an Uber, and then she goes back to Arthur.
Okay, but I don't think her problems are going to be ended. I mean, her problems.
No, the credits come up before Arthur punches her directly in the face.
Let me.
That's you effectively cheated on me. This is emotional cheating, is what it is.
It's emotional cheating. It's even worse than having fucking sex, to be honest.
Yeah, well, and you had to pay at the fucking bar like a dickhead as well.
I know. I texted you guys about that. He gets blanked the whole time. He has to pick up the fucking bill at the end.
Yeah, what a victim.
I think there's a scene where he has to put the car.
His card gets declined. He has to use a different card.
The one thing, you know what? I'm gonna just start a bit of a rant now because it's fresh.
No, start because I think we've been too nice up until now, and I think the good positive stuff.
We've given it its props. It deserves.
We're giving it looks visually good. It's set in New York,
and it does have props that it deserves. But here's the thing that I'm gonna say. When you approach a story like this or a film like this, look, there's no right or wrong ultimately. I mean, unless you're going to go out and be brazenly, sexist or something like that, I think there's no right or wrong really in terms of storytelling. But I think if you're going to approach a film with something in terms of subject matter, it's obviously quite a delicate subject matter of who is she, her identity, and a lot of stuff, like I said, I kind of resonate with it and I understand, and I think in sort of small moments that we talked about, those kind of micro transactional moments, it's crafted very well, respect to it. But looking back on it, I've got a huge problem with that film, which is that in terms of you see it as a trend, but obviously we're discussing past lives today, so I'll try to keep the discussion away from other films too much, but I think it's clear to see. I think a film like this only works if you don't try to build a world where the characters that we're studying are completely virtuous. And I think that this movie suffers from that. And obviously there's elements of, briefly reading of it, that Celine Song's obviously reflecting a bit on her own life. I don't know how close to truth it is. But there's this tendency, I think, where, because these are Asian characters, these are Asian American characters, they're almost, it becomes easier, I think, even as a viewer, from our perspective, for us to accept that these characters are just completely virtuous, right? They'll say things that, they throw. I mean, the film gets a bit hokey at one point, a bit new age sort of nonsense, just sprinkled in a little bit, but
overall, give me an example.
So
Things
obviously
up, I can't
there's the
remember that bit.
is it in Yun is obviously one of the central
Okay, yeah.
ideas, premises, which is, you know, not to
About your interactions in your past life have they sort of an effect on your present?
Is it the
yeah
8,000 layers of
yeah and
something?
obviously
I forgot.
I mean the film itself is a little bit tongue-in-cheek about it, so I'm not suggesting that the film goes into, you know, Scientology or whatever, but the point I'm making is that what happens is that we have these central characters, for example Nora being the sort of core of it, where she's so virtuous, right, that her character's decisions seem flawless, right? It's just about everything's a big R. Every scene you end it and you have to just, you can't do anything else but R. But then you look back and you're like, a few things that she does. I mean, I if I was in the position, it's not necessarily that I'd find them toxic. Maybe is a bit heavy, but I don't think it's that virtuous. I mean, she had friends as a kid, which is fine, and she's obviously left the country. I mean, she doesn't leave necessarily under any bad pretense, you know. The family, it's never really clear why they're leaving, but the suggestion seems to be that their lives quite put together and they've decided, you know, they have the scene where, what's your American name going to be? They pack up, they leave, they're on a plane. There's no suggestion of any sort of issues there. She sets up in Canada for a part of her life, and I think, well, we flash forward a lot. And then she's in New York. She wants to be a writer. She does become a writer. She's apparently good at writing, and she does these various jobs. Everything's okay, but then we get to these moments where she's facing this big, you know, overwhelming problem, which, again, fine, let the movie can be about anything it wants, but her character starts to become a bit two-dimensional, right? Because she's so virtuous throughout the whole thing, and her sort of, we watch it as though her judgments are flawless, right? Because, oh, she's facing this
I didn't see them as flawless.
What would you say is objectionable about what she does, or is not, like, not entirely? Is your main gripe the fact she's just painted as being virtuous and then a bit two-dimensional, or do you think there is something objectionable about what she did?
Well, the thing is that I mean, what's her? I found it difficult to follow her sort of story, because I didn't feel it was really driven by anything except for a sense that this director wants to project these characters as being good, virtuous characters for really no reason at all. I don't know how to describe. Like, sometimes,
But I didn't see Nora. I didn't see Nora in that light though. I didn't see her as
How did you see
that
it?
virgin. Well, this is how I saw it. Obviously, she had that childhood crush. She goes to America to, firstly, win the Nobel Prize. That's her ambition.
The Pulitzer, yeah, or something like that, yeah.
No, it's
But
the Nobel Prize first.
She changes it to Pulitzer.
And
Yeah.
then she changed it. Then she gets back in contact with this childhood friend after 12 years, and they speak almost every day for I don't know how long. And then she cuts him off. Forget it. We'll talk in a year. She then ultimately goes and gets married. Okay. And then she kind of leaves both of them, stringing both of them along, because he then comes over to I forget the guy's name. Hey Song. He comes over, and I don't know if he's hoping for something to happen, but also there's that scene where her and Arthur are in bed, and he goes, sometimes I feel like you don't actually mean it, like you've kind of settled for me. Where
It was a convenient thing to do for her,
it's a convenient thing
getting
to
the
do.
green cards and sort of,
So,
they're both
that's
writers.
not really virtuous. It's like you've kind of left him as well, but you've also you're effectively saying I've settled for you, because, you know, I'm okay with that. So I didn't really see it as virtuous at all.
Well, I tell you why though, just to maybe
Well, you're
answer
wrong.
your
Don't even tell
question.
me.
To answer your question, right? So Nora's kind of caught. Say caught again. It's even the wording of it. It's not caught. She creates everything, right? She starts to speak.
Yeah.
She reaches out to him, and all of it is of her own. Is within her own accord, right? She's created all these unions, and then we see that this obviously starts to disrupt Arthur a little bit, because Arthur is very open, and I think one of the interesting things, obviously a lot of movies tend to do this when they focus, and obviously we kind of, and arguably we might even be entering a golden age, although that's for other critics to decide, of kind of Asian American cinema. Obviously we talked about Everything Everywhere, that did well, and there's been a few. There was Crazy Rich Asians, and a few that have obviously brought sort of Asians to the forefront of the screen, and we see them a lot more, and we see them in their own communities more so than them just being characters to sort of please white audiences and all of that. But with this, it was a bit like two things. One thing that I immediately stood out to me is this film has a lot of these kind of establishing shots where we'll look at certain things of her life, which is like, oh, she's maintained the Koreanness, you know, she drinks hot water with lemon and she takes her shoes off, and we linger on a few things. And part of me liked those scenes, part of me, when I get to the second point, had trouble with those scenes. But you were talking about obviously the situation with Arthur and so she creates this dynamic, right? She reaches out to her past friend. I don't want to say lover, because like you said, they're children, right? I don't think there's a sexual element to it.
Childhood crush.
And then there's this kind of burgeoning sexuality that comes out of it. It feels a bit repressed from his side, but he obviously he's yearning for Nora. We're not entirely sure why though, because the suggestion is that he goes to Shanghai at one point, he meets a woman. I think we're led to believe that he's dating that woman, but he still has feelings for Nora. Again, we're not entirely sure why. Nora's obviously yearning for a kind of South Koreanness in her life. That part I can make sense of. But then she introduces this guy into her life, right? In a small capacity, but nevertheless. And Arthur starts to present his own qualms with it. But what the film does from that point on is it kind of makes it seem like, you know, Arthur's being a bit silly, because how could he possibly understand Nora, right? But for me, I have problems with that for two reasons. Because Nora, she's always in control. She's in the driving seat. So to make Arthur's position is a bit like, listen, you should sort of pay the bill. Don't worry too much. Like, you're not South Korean. You're not going to understand this. You sort of sit and just take it all in. I mean, it's fine that he can't speak the language at that moment. He can't understand.
He's treated a bit, because he doesn't have much screen time, but it's a bit of like a lazy video gamer. He's like a succubus in bed. He's like clinging onto her, and she's looking away.
Very, very true.
The way he's treated is a bit of a like a limpet, you know, not very respected.
And then the point is, so when she's caught in this middle of this Arthur on one side, she doesn't really give us answers, right? There's not really anything given from her point of view. Her sense of it, she mentions again things like Inyan, and then when they have the last discussion, she goes back to some new... Like, imagine you're in a relationship and you're kind of like, wait, sorry, so do you have feelings for this guy? You think he's attractive, you're not sure, you're saying he's masculine. What's the situation? And she goes, listen, you'll never understand Inyan. I'll be like, listen, are you cheating or not? Like, Indian...
Yeah, what the fuck are you saying?
What is this?
Yeah,
what the fuck are you saying? You meet some guy...
Smoke and mirrors, man.
Yeah, exactly. Smoke and mirrors.
Take control of the situation.
And obviously, if you're a partner...
Well, he pays the bill. Is that taking control?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he rips the bill up, and he's like, I don't want this shit.
There's Inyan for you. Take the receipt.
But for example, so the anxieties of Arthur obviously start bubbling up, and he discusses it. But because we've had up to now her life with Arthur, from our perception of it, is kind of, it's nothing, right? We see one scene where she's at the border, he asks that one question, but they talk about the green card, that's kind of smoothed over. We don't really see sacrifices and stuff being made and decisions being made.
He's a bit of a burden, if anything.
Yeah, and all of the anything that even would suggest that Nora's, you know, a taker, if that makes sense, it's just kind of removed out of it, right? We don't really see what they have to go through the process for her to get a green card and things like that. And like I said, all of that is fine if the final scene doesn't rely so heavily on that relationship, because when we get to that final scene, everything that's driving us towards there is all of those things that I just discussed. Her life in that moment, her specific relationship with Arthur. How does she feel about okay, he's come to visit her from Korea. How does she feel about him? Is there a sexual element? All of that is crammed in at the end, but their sort of general life is removed, and in space of that, we just have it that they meet, and now, like Rowan said, it seems like a kind of, I mean, he's almost leeching off her at some points. You know, there seems to be no kind of, I don't know, everything else smoothed away and all the complications are sort of removed up until that point where Arthur's thrown on as like a real character, and the suggestion seems to be that he's kind of getting in the way, right? He's getting in the way of that kind of the Indian-ness that's going on in the background. And for me, that would work better if Nora is more rounded, if her story is more rounded and we see more of her intricacies, good and bad. But instead what we get is a character who's yearning for something that we don't ever really understand, because we don't really see that much of her non-New York life. And she's doing it at the expense of Arthur. So even though I think we take that, I mean, you mentioned, Bonnie, you take that as a kind of a negative. The film doesn't, right? The film paints it as being, in her virtuosity, she can kind of do no wrong, I think. And I don't know. That
She can.
for
She
me.
does it. She does it a few times. She gets back in contact with him 12 years after,
Yeah.
and then cuts him off again. And then 12 years after that, gets back in touch with him, and they agree to have this meeting. So that's two mistakes right there. And she openly says that she kind of settled for Arthur when they're in bed together having that conversation. Makes him look like an absolute victim of life.
Yeah,
I don't think she's being 100% straight with Arthur, right? Because I mean, she's not completely deceiving him, because she's obviously telling him the situation. But would you really go on such sort of, on the face of it, quite a romantic like sort of boat rides around the Statue of Liberty and stuff, which they never did.
Records,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that as well.
But looking at it from taking a step back, I mean, that's quite, it's a romantic gestures. I don't know.
They are.
I don't think
they are.
She's in the wrong, I think.
But here's the thing. I mean, look, we're kind of, obviously, we're here sort of dissecting it, scene by scene. But look, my pretext is, I'm not saying that everything has to be Taxi Driver, right? It doesn't have to bring in, Vietnam War and everything. But I think if you're going to make a movie that, I mean, is almost entirely about one sort of a solipsistic Nora in this case, and you don't bring in more nuances to that, then for me it's a bit like, you either, if you're going to do this, you either have to bring in all the features or you're not doing it at all. Because now all I'm really left with is like, I don't even know what the right words, but it just feels too airy. It's like it's like you've whisked up an egg white and there's nothing else in it. And then the problem I have is that when you look at it now, to step back now to look at the context I mentioned in terms of Asian cinema, is that it gets a bit like, I don't know, it's like you're trying to autocorrect a bit too hard to one side, because I love the fact that we can watch these great productions and they do feature South Korean stories, or they feature stories from parts of the world that I haven't been exposed to as much. But obviously this is not a documentary, but I do think it's warranted in a character study that there's a bit more to it, because I don't think it's fair to rationalize her behavior. And obviously we're not forced to. Obviously us three are making a different decision, but I think stylistically we're forced to rationalize her decision as being, she's not doing anything wrong, but it's her situation, right? Look at the position that she's been put in. She has to reach out to him. She has to sort of use him as a means to get back to this kind of mythical idea of South Korean. She discusses it in the bathroom. She's like, I don't know why, but it feels South Korean. But I think that's used a lot of the time to just kind of, I don't know, her character for me flatlines, and I think that makes the movie flatline at a certain.
But I think it's a bit refreshing to not have characters with like sordid backstories or like motivations which are obviously, I don't know, questionable. It's kind of nice to just to have it stripped down and keep it kind of simple. But I think having said that, there are the kind of the acting for Arthur and the way he's crafted, it doesn't lend a lot of nuance, right? It'll be nice to see him fleshed out a bit in the narrative, because we ultimately, obviously, despite the fact we are conditioned to hate the third wheel, we're conditioned to like pity him. Like, I mean, he acts like a wet towel, right? I kind of want him to be a bit. I want us to be a bit divided, because we know that she would go.
He's a bit like
Hayes
Dennis. Yeah, I
Song,
agree.
right?
I agree.
she will obviously go with Hey Song if it wasn't for the Pacific Ocean and other things, right? So it'd be nice to have us a bit more conflicted.
Oh, I don't think she. I don't think really the film. It's difficult because obviously the one of the recurring themes is that she leaves, and that's part I didn't kind of understand. It seems a bit strange, but he says to her that you left, that your ambitions are too big. You wanted to win the Golden Globe or Nobel Prize, Golden Globe. She wants to win the Nobel Prize, right? and she's left, but we see that she leaves as a child, right? So I don't. What are you, a 12-year-old? You're leaving to win a a prize. Yeah. That part didn't really make sense. But okay, let's say she's left Canada to go to New York to be a writer. That part would, I guess, make more sense. But then in terms of Hey Song, there's a kind of, she reaches out to quench her own kind of South Koreanness. Because actually when they meet, I think there's a few glimpses of sexual tension. I think there's one where she's kind of posing for a photo and then you see her kind of react and be like, well, what the fuck am I
mean, he's got a credible physique for a South Korean. I mean, apparently they like to gym quite a lot, but he's a fucking.
We need to have a segment in every review where Rowan picks out a specific guy that he's attracted to. Yeah, they just put their face up.
Ryan Gosling.
The wardrobe as well. Like he had some nice. He had some
good. Great slacks, dude.
I don't know what kind of hair product that guy was using, but top notch. Also, can I just mention one bit as well? Because when they mention it when she initially moves away, I want to do the Nobel Prize. And what's the second award then afterwards she wants to get?
Pulitzer Prize.
Pulitzer, right.
For writing.
And then they keep this joke going, oh, you psycho. You're a psycho. Like, you're so crazy. Like, well, yeah, relax. It's just an award. Like, I was very angry when they kept calling each other psycho for no reason at all.
Who called who psycho, sorry?
The Korean guy calls her.
No. Hey Song, right?
Hey Song calls Nora psycho because she has these ambitions, to win these awards. But because the movie is, like you say, it's very slow paced. Like, there's nothing really psycho about it. I don't know. It just kind of triggered me every time I heard it.
To be honest, a lot of the dialogue was pretty stiff and kind of lame. I don't know whether it was a translation issue because, I mean, surely you'd want a bit more sort of giggling and flirting, but it was.
Well, the thing is, Hey Sung.
Platitudinous, quite.
Well, what would have been more interesting, I think, is that because obviously we have, like I said, this the sort of magic spell of South Korea, and I mentioned before they treat South Korea in it like it's like a little tropical island, like 30 people, a bit like if you've seen 50 First Dates. And they're in Hawaii. They treat Hawaii like it's like 7 people, one cafe or whatever. They sort of treat South Korea like that. But in a way, okay, let's say it makes sense in terms of her vision of it, even though, I mean, she could visit any time, but whatever. Hey Sung comes in. Obviously, he's almost like the ambassador of South Korea. He comes in, but his characterization is interesting because he's a bit like... I mean, he comes in as kind of like puppy dog vibe, right? He's very into her, and he kind of... I think there's one point where he says to her, Will we have kids or something like that? There's a question that he asks, he asks, lest we forget, in front of Arthur. Obviously, it's in a different language, but in front of Arthur, he's basically saying,
Arthur's watching a film in his own head. He's not there, bro. He's there sipping on his drink.
Imagine being at a bar or whatever, and then the guy that your wife has brought over is talking in their language, and he's like, "Look, would I have impregnated you? If we were there?" It's like, okay, whatever, fine. His characterization in it, which I think the film doesn't lean into enough, because obviously it has its other excuses. I found it a bit strange. I mean, he says he's dating someone. He's flown over here. He admits that it's for Nora. He admits that all these years he's had a yearning. Again, they were children, but okay. And he's had a yearning all these years, and he's obviously had these fantasies of they could be married and they could be together.
But also, she teases him with the little Skype calls as well. So it is childhood, but they also speak together.
Yeah, I mean, she kind of sets it all up, right? Obviously, not him coming over, but the initial few years before, she sets it all up. But even his characterization, again, goes back to what I was saying, is that there's a kind of sweet virtuosity to him. I mean, we see a lot of the time that he's hanging out with his friends, he's getting drunk, he comes back, his mum said,
it's also very self-deprecating. It's like, I've got an ordinary job, I've got an ordinary wage, I don't meet the criteria to get married to this girlfriend of his.
Yeah.
So he also has that vibe about him.
But it's done in a way that there's still not enough for us to sit back and be like, this is weird, right? This nothing about this is really positive, yet we're watching it in this positive light, because obviously it has enough to fall back on. Because Hae Sung, for all intents and purposes, I'm not saying that he's a bad guy, and I don't, because that would, I don't want to fall back on old-fashioned ideas of what's a good guy and a bad guy, but he's not exactly, he's coming into her life in front of her husband. He's doing things that I wouldn't do. Dudes, I wouldn't go up to someone in front of their husband and be like, we could have, I would have made you pregnant or whatever.
Yes, you would. What do you mean you would? Sorry, tell the audience. Don't tell me a Rowan. We know what you're fucking like. So don't give me this bullshit. You probably have.
Guys, this is the last podcast that I ever do. Okay,
Yeah,
I want
bullshit.
I want the audience to
guys,
write
guys, don't believe anything that he says. But yeah,
You know what?
continue.
If I leave this podcast, you
Bullshit.
guys are gonna get a ton of messages. Bring him back. Bring him back. You're gonna get it outside the offices. Can I say which film this reminds me the most of? It was actually, if we've seen it, Her by Spike Jonze. It reminds me a lot of Her. There's the aesthetic elements of it,
but
even the soundtrack.
The Richard Linklater sort of trilogy of rom-com, what's it called?
Before 100%, you can see that it's influenced by that kind of that general yearning, and I think actually the Midnight, that trilogy, I enjoy it.
What is it called? The Midnight trilogy.
I think it's Before Sunset, Before Sunrise, and After 6 p.m.
Interestingly,
like
they were. It kind of has a similar sort of trajectory, right? Because the films are made 10-year gaps.
Yeah.
And within that time, the actors have actually grown 10 years.
Yeah, grown. Like, it's huge. Like, when
Grown
it comes
up,
to...
the fucking giants now. They were
By
little babies. They were like this big.
By the third film, he's like Godzilla. He's like picking her up, and he's like, it's been 10
No, you
years.
took it too far. You took it too far.
Oh, that'll be better.
But the reason why I said Her, though, is that there's a kind of one thing that Her does, but obviously Her is doing it almost, there's almost a dystopian, like just in the back, there's a little corner of dystopia there, because it talks about things like AI, but what it does is use its surrounding space, use the music, and obviously there's a lot of these like kind of moments of establishing shots and music that I also remembered from Her, and it does this to kind of paint a very beautiful picture. But what it doesn't do, and that what Her does, is it doesn't set them out ironically, because in Her there's a sense that we're just a subject of this big marketing capitalist machine, right? But Past Lives doesn't do that. Past Lives removes that irony from it completely and tries to almost wash away any kind of sense of strong guilt or whatever by saying, look, we're just sort of lost in this Indian world, and a lot of the stuff that we do is sort of out of our control. But for me, that makes
I agree with that.
That makes it less interesting, I think. And obviously people can enjoy it, and it's, in terms of its Oscar nomination, personally, I think it stands a chance. I can see the Oscars loving it as a story, but I think it's a film.
What
that
story?
With time, it's a film. It's like, what story? Give a
What
story
fucking
now.
story are you talking about?
I think with time,
the most basic story on earth.
With time, and it is, and actually,
it really is.
One thing that I wanted to, when I
Us
first
three could
watched
make
it,
a better love story just between us three, and as a
think-
cast between a little love triangle. Us.
One of the things I thought when I first watched it, my instinct in terms of like a one-liner was that, you get a bunch of these like kind of Netflix rom-coms that just come out, just pop up, and it's like just like only your mum watches it, right? I wanted to say that this is one of those rom-coms, but just done well. That's what it is, right? It's like the most basic story ever, but it's filmed and shot and to an extent acted quite well. And I think that quite well does a lot of heavy lifting, because you do have things like, I think the year before we had After Sun. And for people who are into this kind of movie, I would strongly suggest go back and watch After Sun, because After Sun is incredibly well made, but the nuance is there in a far more interesting, the allegorical elements of it are a lot more interesting than Past Lives, because it touches on, it doesn't have to be like Rome, so it doesn't always have to be tragedy and things like that, but it at least touches on characterization that when you watch it, you think, yeah, there's someone three-dimensional here. There's someone that I can latch onto, even though After Sun, a lot of it is, we get long moments of no dialogue and things like that, but because the tension is so strong that you're sort of there for the ride, and it's a lot more enjoyable.
The one thing I give it credit for is
not so much.
It's just the fact that it's the show don't tell aspect is quite good. I mean, you mentioned all the the show don't tell. So you don't want to just
Oh,
have
okay,
like
yeah.
loads of exposition and obvious dialogue. Just the fact we're kind of forced to read the micro emotions and facial expressions, and it's done so subtly, which is quite nice. You know, it doesn't fall into Vicky Cristina Barcelona type like arguments and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
that's
nice
true.
to have. We're forced to analyze the tiny
But
nuances of
but
the
that can
of
be
the,
quite risky.
of the
Obviously,
acting.
it can be quite risky if you don't have, and again the comparison to After Sun, but if you don't have enough, in my opinion, enough to kind of to go on. Obviously we have a few of those emotionally charged moments, which I do like, and we said obviously the scene where Arthur meets Hae Sung and things like that, they're enjoyable, and there's a bit of power to them. But I think the show don't tell. If you sit back too much, it's kind of on purpose, right? And I think that the reason why the director sits back a lot is because if you don't sit back, you risk spoiling the thing that you're going for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're trying to make it feel like a serendipity type thing, right? Which feeds in
Exactly.
perfectly with the In Sun
because if you
concepts.
overanalyze, then you bring the things that I just mentioned to the audience's attention, and those are the things that I didn't enjoy about the film, because for me they're a bit too problematic, I think. But
I would have loved to have seen Arthur at least have a conversation with Nora a bit more, just saying like, don't you see what's wrong with what you're doing? You know, just speaking up, having a bit
think
more of
he
a
tried.
Yeah,
voice.
it's
tries
taking
to.
more initiative.
But
He
no,
doesn't-
but a
he's not
bit
very
more.
good at that, though.
I know he tries, but I think just a bit more. Maybe the first time he meets, what's his name? I keep forgetting his name.
Hey son.
Hey, so I don't know. Maybe just to show some, just make him flinch or something like that. Just a little movement. Just be like, listen, you're a little bitch.
I think Hey son with his.
have you seen
you know,
in
he can
21
pack a
21
punch.
Jump
Oh,
Street?
how-
In
oh,
21
fuck
Jump
you.
Street, where he's like, he's like,
Yeah,
bitch.
yeah. It's just a little bitch. Yeah.
But-
All right, I'll
but,
pay for tonight.
But
Yeah.
one thing that just to say, I think you're right. Obviously, his characterization is a bit. It's hard to say unfair, because I mean we're kind of three Western white guys here, and obviously it's
Wow.
I think Celine Song, if she were to watch this, she'd be like, well, you're exactly who, should be affected by this, and obviously I can make.
But we're
sense
talking
of that,
about
but-
Arthur, not Hey Sun. Hey Sun
we're
kind of
talking-
fits. Hey Sun kind of
Son's
fits the
fine.
South Korean paradigm in a way. He's
No, what I
reserved,
mean
he's
is that-
respectful.
No, but what I mean
Arthur
is
is
that
the wet one, right?
but the suggestion, what I mean is that us three as not being South Koreans. I mean, obviously, two of us in this group are not, let's say, native necessarily to this country. If a racist were to find us, but my point is that because we aren't South Korean, the suggestion is that of course we resonate with Arthur, because how could we possibly understand our lack of South Koreanness? But my point was that
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's mainly because we're
No, I don't think it's true. I'm saying
we pity him.
No. But I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying that's potentially what Celine Song in this case, maybe that's what she was aiming for. Is my point. But the point, to go back to what Bardi was saying, that when he does question her in the bathroom, I think it's bathroom.
Yeah,
kitchen, I
yeah,
can't remember. He obviously questions it, and he brings to light his anxieties. Her response to all of it is effectively what the movie is doing, right? Which is like, there's a kind of inexplicable South Koreanness here, and in her answer, she's basically saying to him like, a bit like when a kid is like, oh, how does this work? And you're like, look, just don't worry too much. You're still too young. You won't understand. When you're older, you'll understand. And her response is pretty much the same, because she keeps saying, oh, there's a kind of South Koreanness, but at the same time it's not South Korean, but at the same time it is. And I can just imagine that he's there being like,
bullshit answers.
She's kind of feeding off the fact he's completely unaware of that.
And so he could probably, in that moment, to echo what Bardi was saying, he could turn around and be like, okay, cool, you're both South Korean, but do you want to have sex with him? Is our marriage in danger or anything like that?
Yeah.
But obviously he never goes that far, because he's obviously prohibited, or he's got a self-internalized kind of guilt there that comes to the fore. He's prohibited himself from going that far, which, there's a whole other kind of chasm of issues there. But
I think Celine Song takes Arthur's balls, basically puts them on a chopping board and
I think the
Yeah.
next film,
castrates the motherfucker.
next film, I'm gonna
Puts him
take
into that
your
fucking
balls
pasta that
and-
they had for dinner.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's kind of my rant. But
Should we go
I
on to the
don't know
next question? I think
Yeah.
if there's any other ones.
There's
I mean,
any
that's
time-
it,
there's any
bro.
time left in the
That's-
universe. So.
Yeah, that's it from the questions
Cool.
point of view. Obviously, I added
Okay.
some in as we were going, but that's everything I had for this
Nice.
for this film.
So what do we
Let's
think
do
in
a
terms
quick
of?
round off.
Yeah, but what I was going to say before we do round up, what do we think in terms of its chance at the Oscars? Do we think could this be the one that wins Best Picture? What do we think?
I think no. I'm gonna go straight out and say no.
I mean, what is interesting, right, is in the selection of 10, we have such a gamut of different films, which I think in itself is a good thing.
Yeah.
So we compare this film to fucking Barbie, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like big productions, sort of bombastic narrative, and this is just like stepping 5 steps back, just looking at this thing and you're kind of present the whole time. It's
the minimalism
film,
of
which
it is almost impressive. Yeah, I agree with that.
Whether it has a chance of winning, I don't know. I doubt it, right? Because it's a strong lineup. It's a strong lineup.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that makes me feel like it might not. I could see it winning, and I wouldn't necessarily agree for obviously the reasons I've said, but I could see it winning for a few reasons. But at the same time, if we look back at Parasite famously being a South Korean production that ends up winning, Parasite, for those who've seen it will know, and those who haven't, I think it's worth watching. But Parasite is, it has great amounts of nuance in terms of its character, and its performances are amazing. The dad in particular, he's brilliant in it. But the story keeps you on the edge of your seat, right? It builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. This is, there's slow burners, and then there's this, which is basically just like one candle, and we're just waiting for that one candle to slowly burn, right? And for that reason, I can see it not doing so
candle
well.
in sunlight.
That's a good, it's a good analogy. Actually,
So, but again, we'll see. I think it stands more of a chance than Barbie, but let's see. But yeah, we can round up with, I don't know, our scores or reviews and so on.
Okay.
All right.
Who wants to go first? Shall I go?
Yeah, go for it.
Shoot.
I think with the obvious bad characterization of Arthur, and the sort of minimal plot, which in some sense it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm into that. I think in general the mood film aspect of it, that the music was kind of, you got those xylophones and it's kind of just, it's ambient and celestial in a way.
Yeah.
Music by Christopher Bear, Daniel Rossen, I think. It kind of just ebbed me through it, and I quite like that. I could lean back and relax into it. But yeah, the last scene, it's, I don't know whether they're. It seems fucking mean, right? It seems mean and castrating. But in general, I'll give it a 7. Having said all that, I'll give it a 7.
Okay, interesting.
So it's not bad. I actually liked it.
What do you think, Bardi?
Well, my rating for this film is a 6 out of 10. Right. I don't know if I would watch it again. You can watch it on times 2 speed and it still feel a bit slow.
Yeah.
It's still, and apart from the fact that it is set in New York and it does have some good cinematography, and it is visually good to look at. Overall, I thought the story was pretty basic, pretty boring. I would have loved Arthur to at least have spoken up a bit more, seen a different dimension to that character as well. Do I think it has a chance? I think it has a bit more of a chance than Barbie, but only slightly.
Are you just saying what Dennis says?
Why?
Just parroting Dennis.
Dennis hasn't done his review yet.
No, but he said that. He said that before.
I'm writing down everything. I'm writing down everything you said. I'm going to copy it straight afterwards, buddy. I'm going to say it word for word.
Copy and paste.
Well, I've given it a 6 out of 10, but also took a bit from what you said about Arthur having a different dimension as well. So I'm taking a bit from both. This is what the novice does. They'll steal from the best.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my review that you've just shat on. Good.
But is that what I think? I don't know what I think anymore.
I don't know.
What is my original opinions?
I'm taking on all this learning, and it's like, okay, well, let me say it. But you're just copying him. Well, you guys are sort of learning.
You know what we'll do? Next episode, we'll have Bardi review it.
I think we need some
original
original opinions.
We'll have Bardi. Let's have Bardi review it at the start.
Well, all right, fine. Let me tell you right now. First, Arthur, I would have loved to have seen what's his name again?
Hey Song.
Hey Song. I would have loved to have seen Hey Song just flinch once. That's what I would have loved to have seen. Okay, I don't like this narrative of this woman can do whatever she wants. I don't know if it's like a little nod to feminism. It's like, listen, men are always stringing women along. You can string men along as well. I don't know if there's a flip on that as well to say like, oh,
that's going to get, if this gets more than 20 views,
we need.
If we get more than 20 views, we're going to get some comments. We're going to get some comments.
I don't know if it's a flip just to go, listen, well, men do it all the time. So why do you get offended when women do it? Listen, I think it's offensive when anyone does it to any kind of person. when anyone does that, she should have. Firstly, Arthur should have taken control of the situation. Going, you want to see a childhood crush that you spoke to 12 years ago and 24 years ago? Well, fuck that, because that is emotional cheating. So you can go fucking do one if you're in my flat in East Village. Okay, so those are the kind of stuff that I would love to have seen, and I think it's very obvious at the end where they sort of hug for about and stare at each other for 30 seconds and they don't kiss.
That hug.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that's going on about. I completely missed that timeline or that metaphor that she was trying to use where she goes to the flat, left is the past, the right is the future. So yeah, it's a bullshit,
Nice.
boring film.
Nice. That's good.
You give
Sorry,
it.
also-
I brought it out of you. I
Hey,
like that.
Rowan, did you like that? As long as you're
Yeah.
happy, mate, because this is your
I'm
fucking show.
I'm happy.
But hold on,
That was a nice
what
review
you-
at the end.
But what you said doesn't really. I don't think that justifies a 6. You make it sound more like a 2 or a 3. I think. So. 'cause
Well,
6 is still okay.
but I do like it visually. The visually still was good. You get some parts
Okay.
of South Korea.
The only thing I'm gonna say, just to kind of before I give my review, something that you said that was interesting is you said that there's a kind of nod to feminism, like guys string women along, so why
Yeah.
can't women do it? I mean, look, it's true that guys do string women along. The difference is that guys stringing women along, they do it because they're arseholes. But obviously,
They're horny.
the movie suggests that she does it because.
Ah,
of a
so you
kind
took it
of
too far. Cancel him,
yearning.
guys. Cancel him.
No. I mean, listen. Whether or not that's true, that's obviously what the movie I think is trying to present to us. I mean, maybe we're reading it wrong, but but in terms of my review, I also was going to give it a 6 actually, because I think anything below a 5, I think is a bit unfair to the practice and to the
Rowan, tell him that he's copying me. Just tell him, please.
and to the
Yeah,
general
jump in now.
mood of it and things like that. And I did like a few moments, but it is nowhere near being up there purely for the obviously the reasons I said, the story and things like that. I think it's lacking. I think it lacks substance, and I do think over time, going back and rewatching this, that lack of substance I think will be more and more present. We'll have to
Yeah.
see, but I think a 6 is a fair review of it.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Okay, nice.
This is a long podcast. We've been talking for an hour and a half.
We have. I'm just conscious there'll be a lot of cutting
Although
around.
I think there'll be. I mean, 10 minutes of it was. I think your camera turned off for 10 minutes, and there was
No.
but also other bit
10
of
minutes.
gristle we need to cut
really
out.
maybe not. Yeah, gristle. It's gristle.
There
It's
was-
raw.
there was
It's
some
Crystal. Stop serving me shit.
Gordon Ramsay. I mean,
It's
no, I liked
Arthur's gristle.
yeah.
all the little bits we've chopped off.
I can imagine
His
when
balls-
she
his
meets
balls-
Hey Song.
That's
she's
well
like-
done. You've asked it well done. It's well
When
done.
she meets Hey Song, she's like, "Hey Song, come over here. I've got his gristle in my bag. You want to take a look at it? Look at that gristle. That's American gristle. Disgusting."
Serve it, please.
All right, guys. All right.
Cool.
Everyone,
All right, that's good.
cool.
have a good
Nice
night.
one.
Hey
Cheers,
guys,
cheers,
take
both.
care.
See you later.
See you guys.
Alligator.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.